Hello, we're going to start the meeting at 5 o'clock, call to order. Roll call, Mr. Bell.
Here.
Dr. Finley.
Here.
Reina Diaz.
Here.
Ms. Huguin. Here. And me, Cece Carroll. Okay. All right. Flag salute. Can we all stand and do the flag salute? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Everyone be seated. Okay. Adoption of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Okay, first by Mr. Bell, second by James. Okay, no discussion. Okay, called. Okay, voice. Okay, so let's start with. Okay, the two. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, next, request to address the board. Do we have anyone here to address the board? Nope. Okay. And next is the California dashboard December 22 release. Dr. Emerson, I think that's your call.
Thank you, Madam President. We appreciate the board's time this evening for this study session. Tonight, staff will present a presentation on the California School Dashboard results that were released in December of 2022. To make this presentation to the board, I asked Dr. Nadia Hillman, Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services, to present. Dr. Hillman.
Thank you. Good evening, board. Good evening, my colleagues, Dr. Emerson. I'd just like to take this time today to go over and share with you an overview of the California School Dashboard that was released in December of 2022 and how it relates to our LCAP update. Next slide. So the California School Dashboard is a yearly and annual release that comes out from CDE that reports out on how school districts across the state of California are doing and how they are doing in terms of supporting the students in each district. We have had what the California Department of Education has called it a restart because there has been, because of COVID and because of the disruption of school over the last couple of years, they've changed sort of this format, and there's some disruption in some of the data points. I'm going to review them with you today. So this year, of note about the California School Dashboard is that it only reports on status, only reports on what happened in 2021 and 2022 school year. We will use this to evaluate our progress on district LCAP goals, and we use it, and there's a list of some components of our school district plans that we use to evaluate the needs. It used to be, if you recall what it looked like before, we would get it would be like a gauge, like a dashboard gauge, and there would be colors associated with levels of performance, and we typically would want to see green and blue as those levels of performance that were sufficient, one would say. Well, they've changed the graphic, and it shows you up there. They're using now what would be, I guess, best described as what a cell phone battery looks like. So the lowest performance is sort of 1 bar, if you will, and highest performance is 5 bars. Next slide, please. So on our California School Dashboard, which, by the way, this is a public website. You can go on. I'll give you in the public the address at the end of the presentation, but you go on there and you see what our district demographics are, an enrollment from last year, as well as some key data that identifies what we would call our unduplicated pupil count. And those consist of 3 groups of students that are priorities for the state in terms of funding, in terms of our LCAP funding. It's a priority of serving the needs of our socioeconomic disadvantaged students, and then we would call those students from low-income families. That really identifies students who would qualify for free and reduced lunch, English learners, and our foster youth. Next slide, please. So this
Regarding the dashboard?
I beg your pardon?
Just a question regarding the dashboard summary, or no?
I'm welcome questions anytime, sir. I'm sorry.
No, I was just curious about the summary, the dashboard summary. Am I out of? I just didn't want to be honest.
You're fine.
Okay, great. You know, I was just looking at where it's a chronic, the chronic
Absenteeism,
absenteeism. I'm sorry, yeah. Well, late and bad. Okay,
you go.
the chronic absenteeism, just, if, you know, just a little blurb to tell me. kind of what-
Absolutely.
Yeah, what does that mean to us as board members? Is that something that we have going in the direction of correcting, or is it worse or better than last?
Absolutely. I'm going to go over that one actually
Okay.
in detail in a little bit, if it's okay, if I just going to get to that point.
Not
Because
a
it is a
problem.
really good data point, and it actually changed significantly last year related to COVID. So we'll go over that in just a bit, if I
Thank you.
should just keep moving forward. So for now, make sure that you knew that the state 6 priority areas are academic performance, high school graduation rate, suspension rate, and like you asked about, chronic absenteeism, college and career readiness, and English learner progress. Next slide. So this is what our California school dashboard looks like right now if you were to go online. Okay, so you'll see chronic absenteeism there has only 1 bar, and it is considered very high. And I'll show you the more detailed data about that in a minute. Our suspension rate's about medium. English progress, learner progress is medium. Graduation rate, medium. College and career readiness was not reported on the school dashboard that last year. English, language arts, and mathematics are at the low range. And I'll go into each of these areas a little more detailed in the next few slides. The other data points are self-reported, that all the information is provided on the dashboard as well, and the standards were met. Next slide, please. So just connecting why we're talking about this and why it's important. I mentioned it earlier, the California School Dashboard is one of the accountability measures we use to measure the actions that we have on LCAP, although there are other additional measures that we utilize as well. But we take actions each year to try to address these needs based on what we see here. So it's not about individual students, right? I mean, this is an aggregate of all of our students, but really looking at, there are some groups of students doing better than others. We want all of our students to be doing well and making sure that we're taking actions that are going to address their needs. Next slide. So as a reminder, our LCAP goal is, and I won't read the whole goal there for you, but we like to think about that first goal as about the achievement gap. And this is about academic performance. Next slide. This slide has a lot of data on it, and as a reminder, this is about our SBAC scores and academic achievement. We can measure academic achievement a lot of different ways, but the state really asks us to report out on how our students perform on the SBAC test. That's one test they take at the end in the spring of each year. So I've provided here a comparison, a graph, or a table, and there are 3 years there. You'll notice a year is missing, right? So we've got 2019, and then, oh, lo and behold, there's no 2020. Well, the test wasn't administered that year, so there's no data for that year. Although students did learn that year and did have a lot of school, but we didn't actually, the state suspended the test. 2021 data is there. That's a full year ago. That was our first, actually, that data represents the test that the students took right when we were returning from being in distance learning most of the year. In fact, some of our students were still at distance learning, and some at that point had returned to class. It was the spring of 2021. And then this last column on the far right is our most current data, which reflects last spring, 2022. So you can see in English language arts and math, and then the last column is science, going all the way across the 3 years. And I provided for you on this slide some real key groups that we look at, although there are other groups, and when you go on the California School Dashboard yourself, you can click on different groups, different ethnicities, and get more detailed data as well. But just for this presentation here, I provided you with our low-income students and our English learners and our students with disabilities, seeing how they had performed. We like to look at, we'd like everybody to be, obviously we want everybody to be meeting or achieving standards, but when we take action and when we set goals for our district, we want to see there's growth. We want to see there's changes from year to year. Very obviously, between 2019 and 2021, there's a significant difference. It was a decline, right? There was a disruption there. There was COVID, there was distance learning, all those things that came from it. And then from 2021 to 22, we're setting on the right track. We're going up in most areas, not all. important for us to be cognizant about those areas that we may or may not be making improvements on. This year, we're halfway through the year now. We're 3 months away from taking the test again. Teachers and students and family, everybody's been working very hard this year, and we anticipate and hope, obviously, to see that there'll be improvements from here. Let me go to the next slide and show you another representation of it, because this gives you a much longer, and I like to see a different visualization of it. I like the color, it helps me see it better, and maybe others will find it as well. This takes you all the way back from 2015 to 2022. So the green would represent, the dark and the light green would represent our students meeting or exceeding standards. And then the orange and the yellow are those students who are not meeting standard. And you can see some growth that we've had over the years. And then starting in 2015, up to 2019, probably our best year of that, and then 2021, we're back to, we had some losses I hate to use the word losses, but we have a decrease in achievement in language arts and mathematics, and we're working on improving them from here. Yes, sir.
You want me to wait, or?
No, this is fine, this is good.
When you, as an administrator, when you see these graphs and the adjustments, and if you see either up or, down, how do you handle that as far as, is it by schools, or you do it by grades, or how do you get to the place where you even make the corrections if it need to be made?
Absolutely. This is a part of our normal process every year, going through a reflection of what has occurred the previous year, and then moving forward. Now, what you're looking at here is all students, right? It's a very big overview. So when our principals look at the data, they may typically will look at their school data, and they may even look at a grade level, and they'll look at how those particular students did in 3rd grade, and they'll compare those mostly the same students in 4th grade. Are they doing better than next year? Because each year, if you look at 2nd grade, from 2nd grade to I should say it differently. If you say from 5th grade, a 5th grade student in 2019 is compared to a 5th grade student in 2021, that's not really fair, because it's those are two different sets of students. We really want to see growth among students. So your question was, well, what do you do about it, right? So that's what the plans are. When you approve our school plans, you'll see there's lots of actions that teachers and principals have decided upon. Providing extra time, organizing their instructional day around certain strategies, making a priority about using different instructional strategies in the classroom, extra supplemental programs or materials that we identify that will help certain areas of need. It might be in reading. Reading is a broad subject, right? There's a lot of components to reading. Is it a foundational reading? Is it comprehension? All the really fine components that make up this data point that you see here.
Okay.
Well, I noticed on the graph, 2018, 2019, the trajectory was going up for sure. And then we hit right where the pandemic hit, and that's where it kind of slowed down again. So it was making progress.
Yeah.
And then what happened, like I said, and it's not just our school. I know it's going around the country, so.
Exactly. It's really reflective of what we know to be the case, and we don't want to use it as an excuse.
No.
And I really appreciate what you said. I noticed, right? That's what we do when we look at data. We look at it as an observation. This is what we see, and what are we going to do about it? What actions are we going to take? Let me go ahead to the next slide, and there'll be more time for questions as we go along. I love this format. We can be a little more interactive. Thank you. Graduation rate is laid out here for you here. That's remained relatively stable, although we do know there's been some areas of need. There was some changes in the law that allowed our students during COVID to be able to have extra time to finish in order to graduate, so that really helped maintain our graduation rate as well. And then English learner progress has also remained relatively stable as well, although there's definitely areas for improvement. Next slide, please. The next set of data points that I'm going to go over, and we'll have time to ask more questions as we go along. I just want to make sure I get through all of them. So the next goal is our school environment, and I won't read the whole goal, but it's really about physical and emotional security and safety in our schools. Next slide. So on the California School Dashboard, the 2 priority areas that sort of connect to our goal, our 2 goal, is what Mr. Bell was asking about, was chronic absenteeism and suspension rate. Let me go over chronic absenteeism first.
Dr. Hamlin, sorry, could we just back up one
sure.
one slide? There was one item there, it says local climate survey. I'm assuming that doesn't have anything to do with the climate, but is it the overall feeling
Yes,
that
exactly.
students have about their campus?
Students and families
I see.
Thank you for
Okay.
that clarification. Yeah, it doesn't, it's not about our weather, albeit it does, we typically use the word climate as to how one feels, what's the tone on the campus. Our students and families, but students primarily feeling supported and comfortable at school. Are they included at school? Are there opportunities for them to connect?
And so when it says, in this particular case, standard met, you said these items where it says standard met, that was us self-reporting rather than them looking at test data or survey data. So this local climate survey, was that a survey we sent out to students and families?
We use our California California Healthy Kids Survey that we
Okay.
administer every year. Now we're actually sending it out to families and staff as well, and that is part of this. There is a report that goes with these local indicators that has been shared, and we'll get it. It's been on the agenda before, so we'll bring it back forward. Or if you go on the California School Dashboard and click on it, you can read it all there, all the results and the outcomes of that.
Okay,
And
great,
I'm
thank
happy
you.
to do, and once we get the, not that I'm offering myself up for another study session, but once we get the California Healthy Kids Survey back, we just took it again, had the students fill out that survey in November, and we're getting the reports now, and we'll be sending them out to sites so we can share that with the board at a future date.
Great, thank you.
Next slide. So let's go back to chronic absenteeism. So chronic absenteeism is an indicator that is the state prioritizes. This really only measures students K through 8, kindergarten through 8th grade. And what that means is if a student is absent from school in excess of 10% of the school year. So there's 180 instructional days each school year. That means if the student is enrolled for the whole year, they would have to be absent more than 18 days. The thinking behind that is that absenteeism, a student needs to be at school regularly in order to learn and in order to benefit from all that we have to offer. So we want students to be in school on a regular basis. Certainly, we don't want students who are in school when they're feeling ill, who are sick, but we want them at school, and that needs to be a priority. As you can see in 2019 and 2021, it wasn't measured in 2020, 2021. It was, in the 6 and 7% range, fairly stable. Our foster youth typically, unfortunately, is higher relatively. There's a lot more transient kind of movement around with our foster youth, so we have to really support. There's a lot of support needed there. 2022, last year, you can see a big jump. And a jump in this case means an increase is not a good thing. That means there are more students who are chronically absent. Now, as you recall, last year was our first year back in session, in-person session, but we also had a significant amount of illnesses. People were out with COVID. We had medical, our health orders that required us to have students on quarantine and staying home. Family members were sick and exposures and so forth. This data point really reflects what happened at the schools, and it actually happened across the state same way. Doesn't make it okay, but there is a story there. If you look at the data just as it is, there's an important indicator to realize that there was a significant increase in absenteeism last year. This year, I don't have the data for this year yet, but we are tracking our attendance more, and certainly not having the same level of calls about COVID, fortunately. So we are seeing that we might be back to seeing this decrease. I see your hand at the question.
Yes.
Yeah.
So with this chronic absenteeism, it is irrespective of why they're out. So
Correct.
They could be at a funeral, on vacation with family, sick, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Yes.
Okay. So even if it's excused in quotation marks. Okay.
Excused and unexcused wouldn't make a difference. Like if there was, if they were family was experiencing not bringing their kids to school, students to school, that is an unexcused absence, right?
Okay.
That would go into the kind of in an area that we would address it like in what the old word we used to call is truant, right? So we want to really think about how do we support a family to make sure their student is bringing their child to school every day and on time. That's important, and we have to at the elementary level we have to support families that way, because it's usually not the kids the old school, what do you call it, playing hooky, right? In my day, that's what we say. I don't know that they use that word anymore.
I don't know anything about that.
But this is really about supporting families. And last year was a real challenge. The illnesses, like I said, families had illnesses, and there were fear too. People were scared, understandably, because it was a very traumatic time for all of us. So, seeing some increases.
Just real quick,
Yeah.
any of these, because of some of the percentages are kind of high, any teachers had chronic absenteeism? I mean, I'm not asking for names or anything. What do we do if there's something like that happening?
Well, and my colleague here, he works really hard to make sure that we have substitutes. We work with, making sure that we have a teacher there when teachers are out. We want to make sure that he's giving me, do you want to say something? So I think go ahead.
Also, with COVID, in the beginning, the rules were different too. If they were non-vaccinated and you're a close contact, you had to be out as well. So things change and LA County was a lot different than the rest of the state, where our rules were different than maybe Orange County, Riverside, and San Bernardino, but our absences still count the same to the state, no matter anywhere where they're at.
Dr. Hillman, forgive me if you already said this, but did you stipulate that the chronic absenteeism is K through 8 specifically?
I think, yeah.
Yeah, so just to put a fine point on that, because when we sometimes think about, again, the students that are habitually truant or playing hooky, et cetera, many times we are, attribute that to high school students, because high school students are making a conscious decision not to go. Third graders don't make the conscious decision that they don't want to go to school. That's usually something that's more indicative of family issue, some kind of environmental issue or something like that. So when we look at these issues of chronic absenteeism, specifically in grades kindergarten through 8th grade, I think it goes to the point that Dr. Hillman was talking about, which is how do we support families, and then also how do we understand that there were very, very particular circumstances that were prompting families not to want to come to school. Health and safety, not wanting kids to get sick, not wanting family members to get sick. And so I just think that's really important for us to think about. And then my last piece, which is a bit of a soapbox, which is if the state was telling us to keep everybody safe and putting things in place to have independent study and flexibility and certain mandates that would keep people away from school and work, but then to ding us on the back end of it is it's mind-numbingly frustrating. And so I just want to say that because it's something that has not set well with me. It's like punishing somebody for something that you already gave them permission to do. And so it's unfortunate that is, but I will focus our attention, as I know that Dr. Hillman will as well, on all of the good practices that we have in place that led to the growth, the year-over-year growth from 2015 up to 2019. We had effective practices in place. And so now we layer that over with additional supports around social emotional learning and wellness is where I was going with that. I think that we have a lot of opportunities to really rebuild and get us back to a place that we all kind of know and expect ourselves to be on these dashboard numbers. So, Dr. Hillman, I'll turn it back over to you.
I was going to ask a question. So when you say ding, what are the results of as being, you're probably getting to that. Okay, that's my curiosity.
And we use the word ding. It feels like it, right? No, I mean, I get it. Believe me, it feels like it. And I got to tell you, I'm not the only one who feels like this. Our teachers and our principals and everyone feels it. They feel like, oh, golly, it's not about an individual student, but it's like, gosh, you want to look your best, right? You want the story that is told about your schools to be really reflective of all the great stuff that's going on. So when you see something that you feel like, oh, that doesn't look good, but it really is about direction. It's about helping guide us and focusing our priorities, right? Are we making sure that we look at the right things? We talked about chronic absenteeism. Yes, we need to support families. We also have to make sure that our schools are welcoming and inclusive and have opportunities for kids to be feel connected, so they want to come to school too. No, maybe they're not the old school skipping school, but they know that they might be missing out on something great, and they want to be at school on an everyday basis. So there's a lot of activities that happen at schools for precisely that reason. Sometimes kids connect for different things. They come to school not because they want to learn how to read necessarily, but some of the things that really are exciting about being there that y'all know that are going on at our schools every day.
Just a reminder to the board, the tough meetings that we had last year, because many parents were on one side, the other ones in the other side, and that was probably one of the toughest board meetings that we had, when parents were against for us the kids wear masks, and they don't want their kids to go back to school. Some of them say yes, and some of them say no. I got so many phone calls from different parents, and so that was, I think, at every district. And when I was reading the notes this week, I thought, gosh, but then I thought, no, it was hard. Last year was really hard, and not just us. I mean, every school district went through the same thing, and so we might not be happy what we see, but it's a reality. Everyone is going through this. It's not an excuse. So let's face it. Let's do our best now. What can we do? So I just want to, refresh a little bit what we went through in a couple of board meetings. I mean, to see parents very, very upset, angry, our decisions, so.
Let me move on to suspension rate. That's another indicator for how our schools are safe and feel safe. We want students, it's typically related to student behaviors. Suspension may be an outcome. We worked over many years and continue to work with our PBIS to kind of keep those numbers down. This is another area that we want to keep the numbers lower. You'll see that 2019, of course, 2021, that was the end of 2021. 0 suspensions that year. There were no students on campus for probably 3/4, if not more, of the year. So that would kind of stand to reason. And then 2022, when our first year, this was last year, 2021-22. This is our first year back in person learning. A little bit higher than they were before COVID. I will tell you, anecdotally, one thing we noticed when kids came back to school after being out of school for a couple of years, sort of just teachers and principals and the whole school really working on new behaviors, getting used to being back in school, being with other people, really in that respect has been part of an area that they really needed to work on and continue to work on. And there was a little more suspensions maybe than 2019, but it's an area that we can kind of point to as well.
Dr. Hillman, you said the chronic absenteeism was K through 8 only. Mm-hmm. Is the suspension
K-12?
K through 12. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. I'm going to move on. If that's okay. Marcelo? So goal 3, I don't have a whole lot of data to share on the dashboard right now. It's a spoiler alert. It is about our secondary diverse educational options. This is the goal that we really focus on. What are we doing to prepare our students for post-secondary? Next slide, Marcella. And these are the area that, the metrics that the college and career readiness, which is the dashboard indicator, was not reported on the school dashboard. The metrics that you will see as I work in the next couple of months sharing information that'll be guiding our next LCAP are the career tech pathway completion, our A through G completion, and our advanced placement rate and so on. So those indicators will be being brought forward. We use that for LCAP, but the college and career readiness indicator was not reported on the dashboard.
I hope I'm not too
You're
late
fine.
asking this. We talked a lot about the students. Generally speaking, how has been the teachers' attendance, district-wide? Not talking about any particular teacher, but generally speaking, how about, their attendance as far as the consistency in the classroom?
We had, even our adults had to go through the same rules and regulations, just like our students. They weren't as high, I don't have the numbers on me, as high as the students were, but it was close. And like last year, the month of January was very, very difficult, where that was the height of test. Yes. And so this time last year is where we were making sure that they were talking about not our school district, but in the area of not having enough subs and having just enough bodies in there because so many people were going out. But with our absences, we know that when our teachers are in the classroom, our students learn more. And we make sure and talk to all our staff about that. The governor last year allowed 4 days for COVID. That didn't count against sick days too. And just because, and that meant more people were absent because they were forced out of work because having COVID, there's mandatory at least, in the beginning of the year it was 10 days mandatory out. And then later on it became, this year, having 5 days mandatory being out, which is the rule now. If someone has COVID, positive COVID, they're mandatory have to be out at least 5 days. If they test negative on day 5 and their symptoms have lessened, then they can come back on day 6. But those mandatory before 10 days had to be out, then no matter even if they felt better, they could not be at school and risk anyone else getting COVID.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So the last goal is providing our highly skilled staff in 21st century facilities. This is sort of the basic, what we expect is our kind of solid infrastructure of all of our schools. Next slide, Marcel. And this one is also self-reported, but it's really the piece of making sure that we all have the credentialed teachers, we have facilities that are in good repair, and that all of our students have textbooks that they need. Next slide. So I'm just going to wrap it up now. You're giving you a quick run through of the school dashboard. You kind of asked me about getting dinged, right? What happens? So this is that slide. So the state has said in certain areas that if you have 2 subgroups that score, that perform at a concerning performance in 2 areas, then you're what's called eligible for differentiated assistance. What that means is that the state is saying you need to pay special attention to this situation, and we're going to expect improvements here. So it's really more of a putting you on, and we would on the natural probably notice this anyway, but it really is them saying this is some area that we really need to focus on. And we will be working with our partners at LACO to whatever assistance they can provide with us. But the areas that we were identified in were the subgroup African American students and our foster youth. Those 2 groups of students had 2 areas of concern. They had chronic absenteeism, which is kind of everybody did, but also this particular group had a higher suspension rate that was concerning. So those 2 indicators together said that makes us eligible for differentiated assistance. And then the next group is our students with disabilities. They had 2 areas of concern. Their test scores in English language arts and mathematics, as well as chronic absenteeism, of course, because those are areas of concern. So those are two areas that we need to pay particularly attention to. And as we start building our LCAP for next year, and this is information that was just provided to us recently, we'll be talking with our administrators and school teams of what we can be doing to make these improvements in these areas. Next slide, please.
Dr. Hellman, so is eligibility for differentiated assistance a euphemism for funding, or no?
To my knowledge, I haven't seen any. Have you on those letters? I should.
We haven't seen any indication that there's funding, but we have been notified that there's some additional oversight. So we are going to be having a meeting with some representatives from LACO about this specific topic, and as we've already been kind of preparing for this and thinking about what the strategies are moving forward, we're already thinking about what are the initiatives that we need to think about, what are the strategies we need to move in, what's the data analysis that we need to start to really look at on a school by school, grade level by grade level, subgroup by subgroup basis to determine how to best target this. If money comes, we know that it'll come along with plans and other strings, but we certainly will keep the board updated if in fact something like that does come down.
Next slide. What happens if we don't perform well? I just sort of answered that question. How can I see other schools? So I'm going to go to the next slide. I think it's a better slide just to indicate. So that's the website, ca-school-dashboard.org. You can go on that website. It's translated in all those languages as well. And it's an interactive website, which means you can go in and you can search on any school district in the state of California, any school, any of those areas, and you can take a look at how other areas are doing. You can go check your cousin's school up north or your kid's school in another, and check it out. But it gives you a better, more deep, you can go in and look at our data again. I gave you a big kind of overview. I kind of pulled out some significant areas that I thought it was important for the board to know. I, at this point, entertain any further questions, but invite everybody, including the community, to take a look at the California School Dashboard. And actually, I wanted to conclude with one thing. I kind of have this, worried brow here, but really this is the story of our kids, and this is the story of the hard work in our district. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done. Even when we have to have, look at those numbers and sometimes wish that it was different or better or make other, it's still, there's a lot of work there. We had a lot of work that was doing really well, and we know that we can see the results. And I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of folks who do a lot of work, and we appreciate that from the school district.
Dr. Hillman, how do we define a foster youth? Is someone that doesn't have a house? Someone that live with friends, or how do we define it?
Foster youth are defined, it's usually they're in the foster system, so they're identified, there's another caregiver, somebody else who's been assigned to take care of the child. Sometimes it could be another family member, but they're part of a county system. And it's part of the registration process. Our school sites have outreach. We can connect, and to know who those students are, it's obviously confidential information that we have, and the schools are able to provide additional support, including transportation sometimes. A student may come from have a home district that's in a completely different town or city, and it needs some transportation. We've been able to provide those. The TAP cards were an important resource as well. So that's the foster youth are important. They typically are students who may have lived in multiple places with different family members or different foster families.
And with these student groups that have been identified as needing extra support, are we allowed to use the ESSER funds and the COVID dollars to support them, or are there?
Absolutely. Any of our funds can be used to support this effort, because most of the funds that we have, not only our base grant funds, but any of our additional funding, and a lot of times our categorical funding, really are targeting for students who aren't performing as well as we would like them to, that we would want them to perform.
So that being said, with the money being funded, we can use, then they would be put towards, like you said, tutoring, extra support for how would that look like usually?
It could be extra support directly. It could be direct services, but a lot of times these kinds of efforts are also, how are we training our teachers and staff to be aware of students? What are their needs? Is there a different approach that's more successful for students who don't have, whose language isn't primary language, for instance, is English, or who have had come from been in a situation where they've had multiple maybe trauma in their life? What can we do to support teachers to be better prepared, or whether staff can help prepare and support these students as well?
Thank you.
I would just add, number one, I want to thank Dr. Homan and Mr. Crosby, Mercedes, Ms. Bell, the entire team. It really is a team effort to go through and think about what are the strategic actions that we want to take. I want to highlight something specifically that Dr. Hillman said in her concluding comments, which kind of this is the story of our kids, if you will. And I'll remind you all that as we go through this strategic planning process, the first letter in our RISE 2030 initiative is the letter R, which is resilience. We have kids in a community that are very, very resilient. If you kind of snap out and look at it from a broader perspective, we have good practices, we have a solid teaching staff. We have a solid leadership team that were moving student achievement year over year over year up until the time that we had the pandemic. So we don't have to recreate the wheel. We have the right kids, because they're our kids. We have the right, but we also have the right staff and the right conditions for things to happen. I will ask us to look at new and different ways to tap into the assets and the skills and knowledge of our kids and our staff, and specifically to be very, very targeted. Targeted around what new and different things we might think around chronic absenteeism. Targeted about the new and different things we might think about how to support students with special needs. Targeted and very specific about what we might do to support foster youth students. Not this kind of this kind of blanket approach, but be targeted and specific, because if we focus on good, effective teaching practices, which is the core of moving what you saw, sorry. I'm very high tech here. Effective teaching practices were the core of moving this the way that we saw it move. Good first teaching, tier 1 instruction. So when we really think about how do we target and deal with this differentiated assistance, that's specific and intentional around students with special needs, English learners, and specifically African American youth, as well as foster youth. Like if we got really laser-like in our approach while doing the good first teaching, doing the professional development and learning opportunities, I think we will have a really good strategy overall. So we'll be looking for guidance from the board around how we put those strategic initiatives in place, continue to give you feedback and information and updates as we move along, so that way we can properly address this and make sure that, again, we continue to move these metrics the way that we would expect to. So thank you to the board for the opportunity to present this tonight.
Dr. Hillman, do we have any idea how other districts that are about the same students or same populations with the large Hispanic English learners, and compared to them, do we have any way to measure ourselves? Are we about the same, or?
We can always look on the California School Dashboard, but I would also use that as a launch for some of the work that I do, some of the work that we all do in working with our neighbors, knowing folks in other areas, being able to go to collaborate. We do our own professional development as leaders to ask that good question, right? I'm part of a group that I have people in the same level, same position that I have. What are you doing right now? I just recently, this week, it's funny you should ask that, because this week I got this email from several assistant superintendents with the list of what are you doing about chronic absenteeism? Answer that same question. And everybody kind of put in there what they were doing, and then we'll have a meeting and we'll kind of chat about it. It may look different in every district, right? Every district's a little bit different. This is going to be the Duarte way, right? We want to really make an approach that's going to make the most sense for our students, but it always is getting good feedback, and where's the successes we can build on.
Yeah, I think it is very important for our position as a board members to ask these questions so we know, and then we can tell parents when they ask, or anyone, how you're doing so I can tell them, oh yeah, every district is going through the same situation, but we are doing that. And, so I think it is important for us to ask the questions and for us to have this type of studies. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I would say, Board Member Diaz, that we can say with a clear level of certainty, the vast majority of districts are experiencing the exact same thing as we are, to varying or different degrees. Everybody experienced some sort of kind of reset. That's why they named it kind of the reset. Everybody is going back and reanalyzing where they were and where they are now, because we've all seen a little bit of a kind of a recession back to some pre-pandemic numbers and levels. That's across the board. It's very safe to say that.
Yeah, and I know that, but I think it is important for us to publicly say it, that, so when parents hear, this is going on here, well, it's going on everywhere. And so we are doing our best to improve that. So, yeah, thank you.
But I also say our schools are all different. Like you said, we have different demographics, different socioeconomics. So, and we're a small district. So and I get a lot of the information. I do read a lot of the CSBA, It's happening all over California. It's not just Southern California, Northern California, it's happening across the states. And like you said, we just have to work on what we can do to make sure they can, we can support the kids that really do need it. So, any other questions? Okay. So Nadia, thank you so much. I think I feel how much you care about this district, just by what you're saying to us now and how you said you believe, and it's just by you telling us what you were telling us earlier. I know you care about this district, and Rick and everyone here. So we have a mission here to still move on and do our best for the coming year, and to work on how to do what we have to do to get these kids where they have to get to. So thank you again. So that said, I guess we could adjourn the meeting of this California Dash. And do I have a motion?
So move.
Mr. Bell? Second?
Second?
Second, okay. Raina? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, meeting adjourned.